we have, I think there were important decisions taken by the Council, I think it was in December of last year under the French presidency, where we broke down the old headline goals into somewhat more operationally relevant targets for the next 5-10 years. And I think we must show seriously that we are ready now to develop according to what we agreed then, because then we'll get on the military side instruments that are more operationally relevant than some of them we're having at the moment. We need to look at the battle group concept as well, which is good. I mean, that's a size of units that I think is more relevant than what we discussed in 1999, but we need to look at fairly basic things like, are they flexible enough? Or, an even more basic question, do they exist? Xavier alluded at our previous meeting to an instance where we had the reason to look at whether we should deploy at a certain place. We did not do that, which I think was good, because it would have been bad if we had done it. But anyhow, I remember then looking at whether the battle groups that were supposed to be there did exist. And I found out, yes, they did exist on paper, but beyond the paper, it was somewhat difficult. They were clearly deployable only on paper. And that we can't have. We must make certain that the battle groups do exist. We must make them more flexible. And another idea which I think could be good in that particular respect, we could test their availability by actually asking them to exercise. That not only should they be in readiness to do something, we should have a battle group exercising every 6 months somewhere. And we could use those exercises also to send political messages. One example, we can send battle groups to exercise in Bosnia, for example, now and then. When we no longer have military operations in that part of the world, it's still useful to demonstrate that we got the capability to deploy in those particular areas, and exercises are a good way of demonstrating the potential capability to do something in an area like this. So that we must do. Develop the different civilian capabilities we've talked quite a lot about, not the least from the Swedish side. We are deploying the speciality that we have from the European side now. Is of course rule of the law missions. It's not police missions, we've given up that. They are integrated rule of the law missions. We operate such in Bosnia, in Kosovo, in Palestine, in Iraq, in Afghanistan. They are very complex. We all know the problems of recruiting. We all know that these operations are fairly small in relationship to the task that is there in the relevant areas. But we also know that in terms of state building and governance and all of those issues that we're dealing with in security, rule of the law is absolutely critical to long-term success. If no one else tells you that, the military that are in the relevant areas will tell you that they will never be successful without the rule of the law being ahead of them or behind them or on their side. We need to develop more of that. We need also to develop, in my opinion, more of the economic instruments. If we look at the actual situation in the world today, one of the most imminent, I would say, security threats that we face is state failure due to economic collapse. I vividly recommend to go into the web page of the IMF, and they have a map there of where their standby agreements during the last year. And you can look at where that is and say that half of those will succeed and half of those will fail. Now, failure of a standby agreement means a financial collapse, which means economic problems, which means social tensions, which means political problems and possibly conflict. The international financial institutions are now strengthened, and that's good. We should deploy those, but we should also see them within the political context. And then we should also look at whether we need new European instruments. We have now, we took a decision in the European Council in December, I think it was, to strengthen the capabilities inside the European Union. The Commission now has 50 billion euros for macroeconomic support for non-Euro EU members. But if you look at what we have for macroeconomic stabilization measures beyond the European Union, it is 0.5 billion euros. I'm not saying that we don't need the money inside the European Union. Solidarity among members comes first, but clearly there is somewhat of a mismatch. We need to have instruments for macroeconomic stabilization available, operating in connection with the rule of the law, operating in connection with the military, operating in connection with the analytical instruments, and I think the economic and financial instruments are becoming more important. Final point before I'm talking too long. We can't do anything of this alone. If you look at the different operations that we've been undertaking, be that Chad, We did that well, then we're fairly alone, although we handed over to the UN. Atalanta, obviously, we are cooperating with a lot of different actors. EUMM in Georgia, to take the 3 most recent and most complex operations, where we're supposed to do that together with others. We are pretty alone. But if you take the more complex ones, be that in Afghanistan or be that in Palestine, we operate together with others. So the interaction with the United Nations, interaction with NATO, interaction with the United States is something that we must develop more. I think we've learned a lot, and I think we are far better, and I think we are more open to it than we were a couple of years ago. But clearly there is room for substantial improvement, because particularly if you go into complex state-building operations, they are so demanding in terms of resources, demanding in terms of the strategic patience needed, that I don't think any single actor can do it alone. My prime example is also Haiti. When I discuss with Americans, when the United States, with all their resources, dare not do state building and stability operations on its own, even in Haiti, but has to call in the United Nations, that really demonstrates that these operations are so complex that you need to mobilize a much bigger resource base in the world and work together. And that certainly applies to the European Union as well. So those are some remarks on where we are coming from and where I think we need to head in the years ahead.